Get to subscribe to our channel for more English story. I used to think that success was a straight line. You set a goal, you work hard, and boom, you get there. Simple, right? But life is a funny way of twisting things, of throwing curveballs you never see coming. My journey wasn't a straight line. It was a messy, winding road filled with potholes, detours, and moments where I just wanted to give up. But here's the thing, I didn't. And that's what this story is about. Why we keep going, even when it feels impossible. The beginning, chasing the wrong dream. It all started in high school. I was the kid who always had to be the best. Straight A's, captain of the debate team, first chair in orchestra. You name it, I was doing it. But here's the secret. I wasn't doing any of it because I loved it. I was doing it because I thought I had to. My parents were proud of me. My teachers praised me. And my friends looked up to me. But deep down, I felt empty. I was running on fumes, fueled by a toxic mix of fear and perfectionism. I remember one night, sitting at my desk, staring at a blank page for an essay that was due the next day. My hands were shaking, and my mind was racing. What if it's not good enough? What if I fail? Those thoughts haunted me. I stayed up until 3 a.m., rewriting the same paragraph over and over, trying to make it perfect. When I finally turned it in, my teacher gave me an A, but I didn't feel proud. I just felt relieved that I hadn't disappointed anyone. That was my first taste of toxic motivation. It's the kind of drive that comes from fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not being enough. It pushes you to work harder, but it also drains you. It's like running on a treadmill that's set too fast. You're moving, but you're not getting anywhere. And eventually, you burn out. The breaking point. Fast forward to college. I was studying pre-law because, well, that's what my parents wanted. I hated every second of it. The classes were dry. The workload was overwhelming. And I felt like I was living someone else's life. But I kept going because I didn't know what else to do. I was too afraid to admit that I was miserable. Then, one night, I hit my breaking point. I was in the library, cramming for an exam I didn't care about, when I suddenly couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, and I felt like the walls were closing in on me. I stumbled outside, gasping for air, and sat on the steps, shaking. That was my first panic attack. It was also the moment I realized something had to change. I called my mom the next day and told her I couldn't do it anymore. I expected her to be disappointed, but instead, she said something that changed everything. You don't have to live your life for other people. You just have to live it for you. The shift. Finding true inspiration. After that, I took a step back. I switched my major to creative writing, something I'd always loved but never thought was practical. At first, it was terrifying. I felt like I was starting over, like I was behind everyone else. But for the first time in years, I felt alive. I was writing stories that mattered to me, exploring ideas that excited me, and connecting with people who shared my passion. That's when I discovered true inspiration. It's not about fear or pressure or trying to prove yourself. It's about finding something that lights you up from the inside. It's about doing what you love, even when it's hard. And it's about trusting that the journey is worth it, even if you don't know where it's going. But don't get me wrong, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. There were still days when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I was making a mistake. But those moments taught me something important. Motivation isn't constant, it comes and goes. What matters is that you keep going, even when you don't feel like it. The middle, the grind and the growth. After college, I moved to the city and started working as a freelance writer. It was tough. I was juggling multiple jobs, living paycheck to paycheck, and constantly hustling for new opportunities. There were times when I wanted to quit, when I thought about going back to something safe. But I didn't. And here's why. I had found my why. My why was simple. I wanted to tell stories that mattered. I wanted to connect with people, to make them feel seen and understood. That purpose kept me going, even on the hardest days. It wasn't about being perfect or proving myself anymore. It was about doing something I believed in. But even with a strong why, there were still challenges. Rejections piled up. Clients ghostaient me. And there were moments when I felt like I was shouting into the void. I remember one particularly low point when I got rejected from a magazine I'd been pitching for months. I sat on my tiny apartment floor, staring at the email, and thought, maybe I'm not cut out for this. But then I remembered something my dad used to say: fall down 7 times, stand up 8. So I stood up. I kept pitching, kept writing, kept trying. And slowly, things started to change. I landed a few small gigs, then bigger ones. I built relationships with editors and other writers. I started to find my voice. The turning point, a lesson in resilience. One of the biggest turning points in my career came when I least expected it. I had been working on a personal essay for months, pouring my heart into it. It was about my struggles with anxiety and how I'd learned to cope. When I finally finished it, I sent it to a major publication, not expecting much. To my surprise, they accepted it. The day it was published, I was nervous. I kept refreshing the page, waiting for comments. At first, there was nothing. Then, slowly, messages started coming in. People were sharing their own stories, thanking me for being honest, for making them feel less alone. That's when it hit me. This is why I kept going. Not for the accolades or the recognition, but for the connection, for the chance to make a difference, even in a small way. That experience taught me the power of resilience. It's not about never falling down. It's about getting back up again and again. It's about believing in yourself, even when it feels like no one else does. And it's about finding meaning in the struggle. The present. Why we keep going today. I'm still a writer. I'm not famous, and I'm not rich, but I'm happy. I've learned that success isn't about reaching some arbitrary finish line. It's about the journey, the lessons you learn, the people you meet, and the person you become along the way. I've also learned the difference between toxic motivation and true inspiration. Toxic motivation is like a firecracker. It burns bright for a moment, but it fizzles out quickly. True inspiration is like a campfire. It burns steadily, warming you from the inside, even on the coldest nights. So, if you're feeling stuck, if you're wondering whether it's worth it to keep going, here's my advice. Find your why. Find something that lights you up, that makes you feel alive, and then hold on to it, even when it's hard. Because the truth is, life is messy. It's unpredictable and unfair and sometimes downright brutal. But it's also beautiful and full of possibility. And that's why we keep going. Not because it's easy, but because it's worth it. Because somewhere along the way, we discover that the journey itself is the reward. That every stumble, every setback, every moment of doubt is part of the story. And it's a story worth telling. Final thoughts. Looking back, I'm grateful for every twist and turn, every high and low. They've made me who I am. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to keep going. One step at a time, one day at a time. Because the road may be long, but it's yours. And that makes all the difference. So, keep going. Not because you have to, but because you can. Because you're stronger than you think, braver than you feel, and more capable than you know. And because somewhere out there, someone is waiting for your story. Someone who needs to hear it, who needs to know they're not alone. And that, my friend, is why we keep going. The moral of the story. The moral of this story is simple yet profound. Your journey is yours alone. And the only way to truly succeed is to stay true to yourself. Toxic motivation driven by fear, perfectionism, or the need for external validation will only lead to burnout and emptiness. True inspiration, on the other hand, comes from within. It's about finding your why, your purpose, and letting that guide you, even when the road gets tough. The story also highlights the importance of resilience. Life will knock you down, it's inevitable. But what matters is how you respond. Do you stay down? Or do you get back up? Every setback is an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to become stronger. And finally, the story reminds us that success isn't about reaching some distant finish line. It's about the journey itself, the lessons you learn, the connections you make, and the person you become along the way. Part 2. The next chapter, after the publication of my personal essay, Things started to change, not overnight, but slowly, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through a stormy sky. The essay resonated with people in ways I hadn't anticipated. Strangers reached out to share their own struggles, their own stories. It was humbling and overwhelming, but it also gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt before. But with that purpose came pressure. Suddenly, I wasn't just writing for myself anymore. I was writing for all these people who had trusted me with their stories. And that's when the old toxic motivation started creeping back in. The return of toxic motivation. I began to obsess over every word I wrote. Was it good enough? Was it helpful? Would people like it? I found myself staying up late, rewriting sentences over and over, trying to make them perfect. I was chasing an impossible standard, one that no one had set but me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, writing about overcoming anxiety, and yet I was more anxious than ever. I had fallen back into the same trap I thought I'd escaped. But this time, I recognized it for what it was: toxic motivation. And I knew I had to do something about it. A moment of clarity. One evening, after another long day of staring at a blank screen, I decided to take a walk. The city was quiet, the streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. As I walked, I thought about why I had started writing in the first place. It wasn't to impress anyone or to prove myself. It was because I loved it, because it made me feel alive. I realized that I had lost sight of that. I had become so focused on the outcome, on getting published, on gaining recognition, that I had forgotten the joy of the process. I had forgotten why I kept going in the first place, rediscovering true inspiration. The next day, I made a decision. I would write for myself first. I would write the stories that mattered to me, the ones that made my heart race and my soul sing. And if they resonated with others, that would be a bonus. But I wouldn't let that be the goal. It wasn't easy. Old habits die hard, and there were still days when I doubted myself. But slowly, I began to find my way back to true inspiration. I started writing about things that excited me, things that made me curious. I stopped worrying about whether it was good enough and started focusing on whether it was true to me. And something amazing happened. The more I wrote for myself, the more people connected with my work. It was as if they could sense the authenticity behind the words. The essays I wrote during this time were some of the most meaningful I'd ever created. The ripple effect. One of those essays was about my journey with toxic motivation and how I'd learned to let it go. It was raw and honest, and it struck a chord with readers. I received messages from people who said it had inspired them to reevaluate their own lives, to let go of the pressure they were putting on themselves. That's when I realized the power of sharing our stories. When we're honest about our struggles, we give others permission to do the same. We create a ripple effect of courage and connection. And that, more than anything, is why I keep going, The present, a work in progress. Today, I'm still a writer. I still have days when I doubt myself, when the old fears creep back in, but I've learned to recognize them for what they are. Just fears. They don't define me, and they don't control me. I've also learned to be kinder to myself, to celebrate the small wins, and to remember that progress is more important than perfection. I've started mentoring young writers, sharing the lessons I've learned along the way. One of the things I always tell them is this: your worth isn't tied to your success. You are enough, just as you are, and your story matters. The moral of part two. The moral of this next chapter is about balance. It's about finding the sweet spot between ambition and self-compassion, between striving for greatness and being kind to yourself. It's about remembering why you started and staying true to that, even when the world tries to pull you in a million different directions. It's also about the power of vulnerability. When we're honest about our struggles, we not only free ourselves, but also inspire others to do the same. We create a community of support and understanding, one that reminds us we're not alone. Final thoughts. Life is a journey, not a destination. And like any journey, it's filled with ups and downs, twists and turns. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: keep going. Not because it's easy, but because it's worth it. Because somewhere along the way, you'll discover that the journey itself is the reward. So, whether you're chasing a dream, overcoming a challenge, or just trying to figure it all out, remember this: you are enough. Your story matters. And no matter how hard it gets, you have the strength to keep going. Because the road may be long, but it's yours. And that makes all the difference. I'm so glad you spent this time with me. If you like the story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. Take care, and see you next time.